Hi, my name is Ariel Waldman, and I'm with the National Museum of the United States Army. I'm here with Lawrence Provost on June 29th, 2021. We are conducting this interview over Zoom. I'm joined by my colleague, Brake Finson, and we are conducting an oral history interview to understand Mr. Provost's experience in the Army, specifically surrounding 9/11. So first, could you give us some biographical details, such as your name, date of birth, branch of service, the highest rank you attained, and your dates of service?
Yes, my name is Lawrence Provost. I'm originally from upstate New York. I joined the Army in 1996, active duty, and got off active duty in 1999. Was in the New York Army National Guard until July of 2001. And then shortly before September 11th, 2001, I switched over to the Army Reserve. My highest enlisted rank was E7. And on my 20-year anniversary date, I actually commissioned into the chaplain corps as a chaplain candidate. So I have over 22 years in service now, and I'm currently a second lieutenant chaplain candidate.
Great, thank you so much. Brake, I think, is going to ask the first question. You're muted, Brake.
All right. Did anything in your life influence you to join the Army?
A couple of things in my life influenced me to join the Army. I think coming of age in the 1980s, it was a very patriotic era. Also, my mother's hero was President Kennedy, who said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." And my father was in the United States Army from 1966 to 1969. And he actually served 2.5 years straight. I mean, of course, he had leave and so forth, but he served 2.5 years straight in Vietnam. So I think those were some very large influences on my life as far as joining the Army.
Was your father being in the Army, did that influence your decision to choose the Army as your branch of service?
I think it probably had something to do with my choice of branch, but as far as actually joining the military, I believe it's something I would have done anyway. But I believe America's, and I already knew it as a young age. You know, very often you don't know when you're in the middle of something special how special it is. But I knew growing up just how special America is, and that it was a special place, and that we had an obligation to give back to it.
Did you have any occupation prior to joining the Army?
No, I actually joined when I was still in high school. I was age 17, so I had to get the parental consent form signed, and I celebrated my 18th birthday in basic training. And my drill sergeant made sure to make it a memorable one. So.
Well, great. Can you tell us a little bit about adapting to the military lifestyle, especially so young?
For me, it was what I needed. I loved every minute of it, even though it was very, very hard. I was actually thinking about this yesterday when I was reading about John McCain and his experiences in the Naval Academy and how he really liked it, especially at first, but then he grew not to like it. I instantly liked it, even though it really was my first extended time away from home and so forth. But I liked the discipline. I liked the physical fitness. I liked the devotion to duty. Obviously, I didn't like every part of it, but it really gave me a lot of the structure in my life that I felt that I needed. And I think it helped make me a more well-rounded person. So many people tried to convince me not to do it. They tried to convince me to go to college, and if I was going to join the military, to do ROTC. But I really felt the calling to join as quickly as possible.
Great. And then, so as you said, you were active duty, and then you went into the New York National Guard, and then into the Army Reserve. So can you talk a little bit about that journey?
Yes, I enjoyed being on active duty, but I realized to go to the places where I wanted to go, I needed a college degree and so forth. So I completed 2 years of college while I was on my 2 years of active duty, and I tested out an entire year of college. Thankfully, the Army paid for that, and I did almost a year at Central Texas College as well. So I was able to transfer those in, and I actually was able to graduate college with my high school class in 2000. I was high school class of 1996, so it was a real honor to be able to graduate with my high school class. And I knew that I always wanted to remain in the military. It just was always my heart's desire. Day-to-day active duty did not necessarily appeal to me, and there's nothing wrong with being day-to-day active duty and so forth, but I just really felt there were things that I wanted to do on the civilian side, but I always wanted to be available if my country needed me for wartime. So, and that really was my motivation in regards to staying in, and has been through the past 22 years.
So how did your training prepare you for your initial assignment?
Initial assignment as far as, forgive me, like my active duty assignment, or in the National Guard, or?
Whichever one you feel like answering, really.
Well, joining at 17, there wasn't much training I really could have. I would say maybe, the physical fitness aspects and so forth, playing some sports in high school and whatnot. But really, I think, it's such a culture shock, to go into the Army. I don't think necessarily a lot of things can prepare you for it. Perhaps if you have gone to a military school beforehand, or have done JROTC, for example. But I think, to be taken out of your small town in upstate New York, and you immediately put with 200 people from just not only different parts of the United States, but people throughout the world. There was an individual from Russia who was in our basic training class and so forth. And so, I mean, it really is a large, diverse group that you're a part of. And it's a real culture shock, but it's a good one, because it immediately teaches you that you have to, in order to succeed, you have to learn to work with all different types of people. And, it's not just talking the talk, but it's walking the walk in regards to that. So there wasn't much in that sense that could prepare me for it. Being a tough. I relied upon my faith and so forth as well. While I was in basic, a lot of soldiers get religion when they're in basic training and so forth. But for me, it definitely was a foundational component. But for me, the Army really gave me a lot of the supplemental foundation, other than my faith, that I have in my life. So I'm really thankful for that.
That's incredible. So you said that you transitioned out of the New York National Guard, sorry, flip-flopping in time here a little bit, right before 9/11.
Yes.
So can you kind of talk about that experience transitioning out and then into the Army Reserves a little bit?
Yeah. In the summer of 2001, it just had, wasn't really going anywhere with my unit. And I certainly don't want to disparage or anything like that, but it would just, there just wasn't a lot of opportunity. And, I literally could have stayed there the next 20 years and done nothing. And, after graduating college and so forth, and I just started thinking much more about my future. And I said, if I ever go to war, and I was thinking this in the summer of 2001, what type of unit would I want to go with? Who would I want to serve with? What would I want to do? So I actually was able to transfer to the Army, to the Army Reserve, and I transferred to the Civil Affairs branch. So, and that was in July of 2001, a couple of months before September 11th, which was a very, very pivotal decision in retrospect.
Absolutely. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes. Civil Affairs is part of Army Special Operations Command. At the time, it was the only Army Special Operations element that actually had women in it as well. But the way it's framed, even by the soldiers in it, even though command may not necessarily like it, is Peace Corps with guns. So while it's not the infantry, it can be an inherently dangerous job in that you go out to the, to the villages, the towns, you meet with the elders, in the host nations and so forth, host nation governments, the elders, school officials, and we facilitate the roads, bridges, schools, reconstruction, local governance, and so forth. So it really was right up my alley as far as my degrees with history and political science and so forth. And it just really spoke to that need of, wanting to be on the ground and wanting to make a tangible difference, throughout the conflict and beyond as well.
Sounds like a very noble profession, and a noble choice in knowing yourself enough to choose that for yourself. Did you ever think that, you were going to be deployed and that you would actually be in a wartime service?
I did, especially being with civil affairs, but I never, obviously, very few of us, knew what was coming in just a couple of months. In that summer of 2001, I had actually returned from China. I did a few weeks in China. I took a trip there in the summer of 2001, and that was after the surveillance plane incident where one of our military surveillance planes had to make an emergency landing on, I believe it was Hainan Island off the coast of China. And, I just was very, very convinced about China being our next and largest political threat. And, maybe in retrospect, that still could be true, but we did not see what was coming, on September 11th, 2001.
Could you talk about your experience the morning of September 11th, 2001?
Sure. I actually had just returned from PLDC, which was, basically the course where you become a sergeant in the Army. My new unit had sent me to that. I was the class first sergeant for that. I had returned on a United flight out of Dulles Airport, and I believe I got in on September 9th, 2001. So stayed home a day, and then on the morning of the 11th, I received a call around 4:30 in the morning asking if I would substitute teach that morning. And I said yes. And the next day, I was going to start graduate studies at State University of New York at Binghamton. And so I was really, really looking forward to things in the fall of 2001. And when I woke up again that morning after getting my 4:30 phone call, I looked out the window, and I seldom ever say this, but not that I don't think it, but I seldom say it out loud. And I said, wow, today is a great day to be alive. I just looked out the window, and it was just such a beautiful, perfect day. And, quite obviously, I turned on the television, and, it was right after the first plane went in, and it was before the second plane went in, and I saw the second plane go in. Well, I didn't actually see it because of the angle it was at on television. It appeared to be an explosion, and the two towers were superimposed upon each other, so it was hard to see. But obviously, in the seconds thereafter, it became very clear of what had happened.
Now, do you know of any common misconceptions about Ground Zero or about the events of the day in general?
I'm sorry. Could you repeat that? It came in a little muffled.
Okay, yeah. And can you talk about any common misconceptions about Ground Zero that come to mind, or the events of the day?
Misconceptions regarding September 11th. Well, I would be very wary of anybody who, not anybody, but a lot of folk who, Monday morning quarterbacking, or in retrospect. Now, I'm not talking about, the intricacies of, certain things. I guess what I'm saying is I'm wary of anybody who said, well, we knew this was going to happen. Now, there were individuals, obviously, who did warn, such as John O'Neill, the FBI agent who was actually in charge of the Bin Laden investigation, who actually retired from the FBI and took up a job as head of security at the World Trade Center and was later killed there. So, those, but unique and extraordinarily talented individuals like that who were giving those sorts of warnings, those were really the exception. I think what I would want posterity to know is that, ordinary people like us, we did not necessarily see it. Obviously, there was intelligence chatter. There was, there were warnings in that respect. But as far as the American public goes, this was not something that we really saw coming. The biggest issues at the time that we were dealing with were tax cuts and stem cell research. Those were really the issues. It was Michael Jordan, I believe, had announced his return to the NBA that day. There was just, it is really hard to grasp and show, the difference that one day really makes, and just, that everything really changed.
So as you said, everything kind of changed. So when you watched on TV and you saw what was going on, what was your reaction?
Of course, it was shock. It was horror. I didn't have the feeling like, wow, I'm watching a movie like a lot of people did. But to be frank, the first two reactions I had were, this probably has something to do with Israel and the Middle East. And the second was, I'm almost ashamed to admit it, but I'm not going to hear the name Gary Condit for a long time. That was a congressman who was frequently in the news for a scandal that was going on at the time. And it was like the biggest thing, other than perhaps Michael Jordan returning to the NBA. I mean, that was the news cycle. But those were the two things that immediately came to mind. And and it was after the first tower collapse that I asked my unit for permission to go down there and assist in the search and rescue, and they granted that.
Can you talk a little bit about your experience going down? So you were in upstate New York, where you're from. Can you talk about getting that okay? What happened next?
Yeah, I got in my car, and I initially tried to find a bus that would go down there, and all the buses were canceled, as was most of the American transportation system that day. So I got in my car a little bit north of Syracuse. Normally it takes 5 hours to get down there, but I made it down in 4 hours. I was going so fast on the New York State Thruway and so forth, and nobody stopped me. It just was the feeling that I had. I'd seen the movie Pearl Harbor about a month before, and even though it may not have been particularly well made, I do remember the feeling in the battle scenes as the Japanese planes were approaching and so forth. And during that car ride, my mind just kept flashing back to that and so forth. And and throughout the day, it was just the news had started to get worse and worse. Obviously, I think when the Pentagon got hit, that is what really freaked people out, because it was like, what is next? Because wow, they even got the Pentagon, and not taking away from, what happened at the World Trade Center, of course. But, we thought after the second plane, I think most people was like, okay, I mean, this is an awful, thing that has happened, but it's confined to New York, and, hopefully they'll be able to rescue as many people as possible. And the thought of the buildings collapsing was not something that had entered most of our minds. So, the second plane hit, and then, about a half hour later or so, a little more than a half hour later, the plane hit the Pentagon. And I think that is when people really started freaking out. And, people were thinking, this is World War III, and this is just, and then of course the plane in Pennsylvania, Flight 93 and so forth. So, I mean, the day just, it got crazier and crazier as it went on.
How were you able to, take all that crazy and be able to fulfill your mission and what you did once you got to New York City?
Well, because people needed help. I mean, it stands on its own. There's really, you shouldn't be thinking about necessarily, larger implications. I mean, I guess maybe you can, but the sole mission is there to go and rescue people. And we just really thought that be able to find people that there would be people, in a void or, somewhere, but, unfortunately there were very, very few and far between. I believe it was only 19 people were pulled out of the towers after the collapse. I had a subsequent conversation with Thomas Von Essen, who was the New York City Fire Commissioner, and he told me that on the evening of September 11th, because of the pulverizing nature of the collapse of the Twin Towers, that it would be nearly impossible for anybody to come out alive, and that he was told that on the night of September 11th. But we didn't know that, and we all held out hope, as I'm sure Mr. Von Essen did as well. But unfortunately, it was very, very difficult.
Can you talk a little bit more about your role at Ground Zero and your responsibilities, what you did there?
Sure. I linked up with a bunch of military folk, actually, such as myself, who were not on orders. As I drove into the city, I kept asking NYP. I was driving down East River Drive, Henry Hudson Parkway, or excuse me, East River Drive. And I'd asked NYPD officers, where are the military? And, they just pointed me in a particular direction. So I ended up at 340 West Street, which is 340 West Side Highway. We didn't know it at the time, but that actually was the campaign headquarters of Michael Bloomberg, who subsequently became mayor of the city of New York. And he had given up that building for military folk who were not on orders, but either happened to be in the city or joined in the rescue effort. And so what Mr. Bloomberg did was he had given up his office space, which, being a billionaire, was very extensive, had an extensive communications network, televisions, telephones, all the logistical items that you might need, food, water, and so forth. So it was really very generous of him. And just linked up with whatever crews that I could, and started going down there. I arrived on the afternoon of September 11th, and subsequently started digging with the first person I dug with actually was Colonel Mike Finn, who ironically was in my chain of command. I was in a civil affairs battalion. He was in our civil affairs brigade. He was a full colonel, and he subsequently, unfortunately, passed away from cancer that got him very, very quickly. It was either a year or two ago, which may have been related to September 11th. But he was the first person that I actually dug with. And then through subsequent days, dug with other military folks as well. Some of them have gone on to very distinguished careers, such as Rob McGovern, who had been in the NFL and who was a part of the Civil Affairs and Psychological Operations Command. And he later went back active duty as a JAG and served down in Gitmo and so forth. So it was really a really unique group of individuals that were down there, and just trying to do whatever we could to find people. But it was digging day and night for the most part. I mean, there were subsequent breaks, especially when they would sound the alarm, stating that another building would collapse. So we just would scatter from the site and so forth. I remember I believe it was either September 13th or September 14th, finding pieces of the plane that I recognized to be pieces of the plane at the South Tower. And that was, that made me very, very angry. It's interesting, some people you may get angry looking at it, at the whole site. I remember the day after the site, I actually was able to climb up into the World Financial Center, which is a building complex which is nearby, and the windows were blown out, and I actually was able to look down upon the entire site like you see in those TV shots and so forth. And it reminded me of like Hiroshima or Dresden, or the movie The Day After from 1983, which was a nuclear Holocaust film. I saw that, and I just, I was blown away. But the first time I was really, really angry was when I found those pieces of the plane, and I actually handed them over to a female FBI agent who was on site as well. So I stayed until Sunday, September the 16th, and it was the worst of times, but in some ways, and I want to be careful of how I say it, but it was also was the best of times, in the sense that you saw the best of humanity. You saw people who were giving without impure motivation, that people were just really looking out for each other. Um, the phrases I heard most at the site were, uh, good luck, God bless you, stay safe. I mean, just really fundamental things of caring for other people. And I remember in the days after September 11th, just hoping that sort of feeling would last. Um, and it's kind of sad when you see it, when you see that going away, very slowly. Um, I think, the end of the year, and then of course the subsequent final cleanup of the site and so forth, and then you have the run up to the Iraq War. So I think a lot of that feeling dissipated, but I try to remember it. I try and remember, for the brave men and women who are down there. I try to remember for the victims and so forth. But it was you know at times it was scary as well. I think the biggest fear that I had was probably, it wasn't dying or getting hurt. It was finding somebody in a particularly gruesome fashion, because I was, I think, 145 pounds at the time. So very often I would be, the guys would lower me down into a void or somewhere, I don't want to say deep within, but, maybe 10, 12 feet down and so forth, and I'm the only one. And, and it's nighttime. And, that's kind of, it's kind of a horrifying experience in that regard. So I guess I can say, thankfully, I did not find anybody, especially at nighttime and so forth. We did find people, during the day. I remember going into a daycare of a building next door. It had a sign on there that said daycare. And I said to one of the soldiers next to me, I said, I am not going in here alone. So, we went in together, and thankfully the daycare had been cleaned out, and, no children had been harmed. But that was, those were probably actually the scariest parts of it. But I wasn't particularly worried about getting hurt or getting killed.
Wow. Can you talk about how you had the strength to keep going after seeing these harrowing scenes and being lowered down, and the negativity that kind of came out of that, and the media and all of that? How did you find the strength to keep going?
Sure. Well, in regards to the media, the only media that I heard when I was down there was when I was in 1010 Firehouse, across the street from the Trade Center, and it had been just about completely, not destroyed, but it was, you could definitely see all the dust and the smoke and everything in there. And I heard on the radio about New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani, and it was just like, wow, that was kind of a flashback and a flashpoint, because I remember he was leaving office and so forth, but he had a reputation as a very tough but very effective mayor. I remember seeing some newspaper headlines on September the 13th, when I took a Coast Guard boat across the river in New Jersey to get some supplies. And also, very briefly, I think it was on Saturday, which would have been maybe September 15th or 16th. But it was that Saturday night. It was a Burger King across the street from the Trade Center, and I actually slept in one of the booths there for a couple of hours. And CNN was on, and they had John McCain on there as well. And, he was talking, I believe he was talking about how, you better pray that God has mercy on you, because we won't. But that was the only media that I saw. So the media wasn't really a particularly big deal in that regards, but it was, whatever I saw was very motivating. For me, it was motivating to hear the name of Rudy Giuliani, because of the reputation that he had and so forth at the time. Excuse me. May I get a glass of water? Okay, I'll be right back.
Yeah.
Thanks for the break.
So we were just talking about kind of how you had the strength to keep going for, you were there from September 11th to September 16th. So, very little sleep, finding these harrowing scenes and being in these kind of frightening situations. So you said the media was a motivator. Was there anything else that kept you motivated?
Well, it was, I mean, it was a small motivator. It wasn't, because we really were isolated from what was going on in the rest of the country. I had no idea of what was going on in the rest of the country at the time. I really didn't. But it was the idea of, helping our fellow Americans and, whoever else was buried under there. I mean, it's just, we did what we had to do. And it's hard to, intellectualize it further, but yeah, I mean, it just was, it was, to save other people. I mean, that's what we had to do. So that's really what ran. I mean, it was an attack on our country as well. There was a very high degree of patriotism down there, especially from the cops and the firefighters. It was mostly the firefighters that were on site, but there was just a vast array of individuals that were on the site. So, and I think helping the person next to us, even though we didn't know who they were, and it's very much they felt like your brothers, and so it was so it was a variety of things I think helped keep us going. And obviously through that there's a very strong adrenaline rush and so forth that keeps you going. And also just seeing the kindness of the people of the city of New York. I mean, people were just almost immediately just bringing so much stuff down, and from the rest of the country as well. People bringing food and water and things like that. I mean, while the scenes subsequently replayed on television of people digging and so forth, those were obviously very, very harrowing things. But you also had probably out of the sight of the cameras, just off the site, as soon as you would come off the site, there would be, food trucks there and people would be there feeding you. I'll never forget digging and going back to 1010 Firehouse for a rest. It may have been after an alarm had sounded. I don't remember, but, definitely went back in there for a rest. And, I was kind of starting to get the 1,000-yard stare. And that was either on that Thursday or Friday. And a woman, I believe from the Red Cross, came in and she just said, can I wash your face for you? And she came in with, and I didn't say anything to her. And I don't know why I didn't say anything to her, but I think it was just sort of that agreement that you can go ahead and do it. And so she just, she started washing my face off, and, there was all this dirt and gook and so forth. And it was just, that sort of kindness also helped keep you going. But primarily the motivation was to try and find whoever was buried underneath.
Can you talk about your most vivid memory of that time? Something that keeps coming back to you, or something that stands out in your mind of that time?
There's so many things. The feeling of patriotism, the brotherhood. Unfortunately, the first victim that we found was something I'll never forget because of how particularly gruesome it was. And that's an image that will always stay with me. The frighteningly real aspect of it at nighttime, with the smell, the smoke rising, but all the lights that were on the site, the big, they're not searchlights, but almost like movie lights. In fact, I think movie crews did come down to help provide lighting. That's when, the feeling of this is almost like a movie came in. I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that Saturday night, a small void where I was just in. It was perhaps 10 to 30 seconds after I left the void, the whole void shot up in flames. That's something I'll never forget. Of course, being lowered down into the World Trade Center. The American flag ceremony that we had on September the 13th in front of the plaza. That's something I'll never forget. And I'll never forget when I stopped digging. It was that Sunday, and it was a strange feeling because that Saturday, been digging pretty consistently, but that Saturday was the day. I mean, we all just really just pushed through, because I think on Friday it had rained. So that Saturday we just really, really pushed and tried to find people, and stayed up really late doing so. And that night I slept on a yacht that was in the harbor there. A bunch of us did. And I remember waking up that morning and seeing the sunrise over or it wasn't the sunrise, but maybe it was the cloud rise. But I saw this beautiful scene over the Statue of Liberty, and it was just, it was such a beautiful thing. And was thinking that, this day is going to be just like yesterday. Okay, we didn't find anybody, but we're going to continue. It's Sunday, we're going to keep on. And got to the site, and it was different than the day before. There were very few people there that were digging. We still had the bucket brigade that was going, but it was not the scene that it was the day before. And also, so I get onto the bucket brigade, and I find that my arms are not working. I mean, they're like literally not working. The rest of my body is, and I'm just like, what is going on here? And probably the strangest thing that happened, it was almost like I could see myself from a distance. I could see the whole site from a distance, and I could see myself. And, I've talked to people thereafter that's actually not an uncommon thing that'll happen in a traumatic situation. But so I could see myself from a distance. And so I just, I went and I sat down off to the side with a group of firefighters, and, and they told me, they just said, "Kid, we're not going to find anybody." I told them that I was from the Syracuse, New York area, and they said that it's okay to go home. And there was a guy from the Red Cross who came up and started talking to me as well. And he had said essentially the same thing, and come to find out that he was from Syracuse. And for me, that was just sort of maybe a little bit of a motivation for me that, maybe it was time. Maybe it was time to go. Maybe it was time to hang it up. So, I ended up leaving that night, but I felt guilty the entire drive home. Felt guilty about leaving and so forth. And, it is what it is. It is what it is.
Yeah. Can you talk about, what happened after that, how you ended up being deployed to Afghanistan the time after?
Yes. Yeah, that was the one thing that I looked forward to after September 11th was I wanted to go to Afghanistan, and I was so excited and so very, very happy to do so after seeing what I saw at the Trade Center. So, we flew over there in September, and we stopped over in Germany for a week. Our plane, we'd flown into the wrong airport because our initial flight, we were bumped for a more important priority group. We'll come to find out we were the more important priority group that was supposed to go. So because of that, we were essentially on the wrong plane, which flew into the wrong airport. So we were stuck in Germany for a week, which was a very terrible thing. But no, actually it was a very wonderful thing. But they'd asked us before we left Fort Bragg, start growing our beards and so forth. And so, and just, have a little bit more of a civilian appearance, don't get your haircuts. So we had left Fort Bragg and went to Germany, and we actually flew out of Germany on September 11th, 2002. And I thought that was very, very appropriate. And, so going to Afghanistan for me, that just was, an incredibly motivating and redemptive thing for me to do. And I suspect it was for all of my teammates as well.
Can you talk a little bit more about your experience once you landed in Afghanistan?
Yes, went to a small town after we were at the Special Forces compound in at Bagram Air Base for about a week, and then subsequently we were tasked out to our assignments. And ours was at a small town called Organy in Pakatika Province, which was site of a big siege, I believe, in 1983 during the Soviet-Afghan War. But Organy, basically the way I try to frame it to people, if people remember the soldiers that were playing baseball with the kids in Afghanistan in the early days, that was at Organy. That was at our fire base. And it was the Special Forces team that came in before us that had actually started that. And we continued with the program and so forth. So, but I loved Afghanistan. We lived in a tent. We didn't have air conditioning. We didn't have any of the stuff that people complain about now, but I absolutely loved it. It was like living in biblical times. It was so simple. Your cares were the most fundamental of things. There were survival, and what is it that the good Lord has put you here to do. So, so what we did was we facilitated some school projects. We facilitated the local governance, holding the Shura meetings and so forth, some roads, some wells over there. I mean, just very, very fundamental things. And it was very much a culture shock too. People are so poor over there. Kids will literally run for a mile to your vehicle to get a pen from you, just a pen. It's so simple, but it's so incredible. Of course, we continued the baseball program with the kids, and we had a great time with that and so forth. And while some people would say that was a waste of time, it actually wasn't, because what you're doing is training up a new generation of Afghan to trust American soldiers and so forth. And the kids actually were a great source for us. They would very often come up to us and tell us like, hey, there are some weapons over here, or there's this or that. So, we would often give the kids candy and things like that and so forth. Many Americans from my college, from throughout, would send stuff over there, whether it be clothing, pens, notebooks for the kids and so forth. At the schools over there, if the kids get out of line, the teacher will actually either beat them with a stick or throw a rock at them. And it's so school discipline's not really an issue over in Afghanistan. It's very, very strict over there. And the kids will actually, they'll just, they grow up because they don't have any toys. So they grow up throwing rocks at each other. That's just what they do. I was particularly struck by the lack of women over there. And I'm not talking about necessarily in the United States military, but in Afghanistan. I mean, obviously they were there, but they were not really seen in public. Only one time did I ever see an adult woman's face. And that was when a woman came to our fire base to give birth, and we actually helped her birth the baby. But that was the only time I saw an adult woman's face in Afghanistan that was Afghan and not American. And that was a real change. That was a real culture shock. I didn't hear birds for 6 months. And I remember when I went back to Bagram Air Base in early 2003 for a week, hearing birds chirping, and it was the most beautiful thing in the world. And I hadn't heard it for such a long time. So being in Afghanistan, you really gain an appreciation for the simple things of life, the real things of life. I know a lot of complaints can be made about soldiers' living conditions and so forth, but I think frankly, to be in that type of environment, it really gets you down to the fundamentals. And also it helps you understand the way these people live. And, maybe we should start considering, maybe we should start living like the people that, when we're over there, we should start living like the people that we're actually trying to help. And I don't want to say convert to democracy, but trying to help them along and show them some of the things that they can do and so forth. I think that would be very, very helpful to live as the locals do. We had an amazing time there when we were able to I'm Christian, but we were able to celebrate their holidays with them, and they loved it when we did that. And they would come to our fire base. I remember the townspeople actually came up and they gave us a Christmas card on Christmas Day, and that's stuff that you don't read about. That's stuff that you don't hear about, and it was a truly wonderful thing. I remember when the Space Shuttle Columbia came apart. I don't know how they heard about it, but somehow the townspeople heard about it. And they actually came to our fire base and they wrote us a letter of condolence to the American soldiers of Firebase Orkney, our condolences on the loss of the brave Americans in the Space Shuttle Columbia. So, I mean, it was truly, truly incredible. There were some signs I didn't start liking towards the end. Like, we did not have a television for the most part. We did not have, our food was cooked by locals. It was cooked by the Afghans. It was, they made their bread, they made their dough. For Thanksgiving, we butchered a goat that we had bought. And it was great. And I didn't like it when it sort of became more and more big army, when quote unquote, better food started coming in, contracted food, the base is starting to be built up, television started coming in. I mean, it just really, I felt, started to take us away from the mission. I mean, it very much was like a Lawrence of Arabia kind of experience. And it was just truly incredible, to be with those people. And those people are so happy, even though they're so poor. They're so happy and so family oriented. And I think there's many things that we could learn from them in that. And the only time I ever saw Afghans getting depressed was when we would really push and show them what the American way of life was like. And then they started to realize, how incredibly poor they were. But they really, they had a lot. They really had a lot. They just didn't know it.
That's incredible. And then I also know that you were a part of Operation Iraqi Freedom. So can you talk a little bit about that and your experience in Iraq?
Yeah. Iraq was a bit rough, to be honest. We flew over in September of 2004. We were in Baghdad. We were one of 3 civil affairs teams in Baghdad. So we had, I believe it was 52 projects going on in the Adamiyah district, which was a heavily Sunni district, and 52 projects, about $10 million and so forth. I was the acting team leader for the first 2 months. We didn't have an officer, so I led a team of 3, including myself, and then our officer arrived. But I led the team for 2 months and then continued on as the team sergeant. And it was incredibly hot. It was incredibly brutal. It was urban warfare. It was not fun. And it was such a contrast from Afghanistan. The Iraqi people knew all about America. Not that Afghans didn't. One of my interpreters in Afghanistan, he actually had a laminated picture of Monica Lewinsky around his neck. And he would say, yeah, she is a good girl. She was with Clinton, sir. But that was the exception rather than the rule. And he was moderately well educated. I say moderately, but in Iraq, very well-educated people, especially in and around the city of Baghdad and so forth. So, there was, I think, a little bit of an anger that people had towards the Iraqis for not getting it right. Very often you heard the lament, well, just, and this was when the insurgency was increasing, just bring back Saddam. At least he kept order and so forth. But there was a lot of the ethnic tensions, the ethnic rivalry and so forth. We did pretty well in our district. And we were co-located with the Arkansas National Guard, which fell under the 1st Cavalry Division. But the Arkansas National Guard really did an incredible job in the Adamiyah district. But the problems were that we had 2, sometimes 3 different chains of command, and they didn't like each other, which made it incredibly difficult for us. But we felt very, very strongly about our team that we were very much, we considered ourselves part of the Arkansas crew in the Arkansas National Guard, even though we were Army Reserve, because we were on their base. And, we went out with them on their patrols. They protected us. They, saw us to our meetings and so forth. They helped us with, the drillings of our wells. They went to our ceremonies. They helped with our governance meetings. We helped carry their dead, when that happened and so forth. And I think also there was definitely tension, like my chain of command up in Taji. They very much would, they would tell us to take the same route all the time to go back up there, which was incredibly stupid and ludicrous. And it's like, we take the same route at the same time. Eventually, we're going to end up getting hit. And the Arkansas crew just would have none of that. Be like, no, we're going to do things our way. And so they would get us up there, in a safer way. For meetings we had in Taji, but then our chain of command would be upset and yelling at them. Well, why are they late, or why this, or why that, or I remember one of our commanders was upset when three soldiers died from Arkansas, and we had helped clean the remains out of their vehicle. It was an IED. It was January 4th, 2005. And it was just incredibly, I talked about the World Trade Center being horrifying, but this was a horrifying experience. And one of our commanders, in fact, it was our commander himself. He was upset with us because we did not get our daily report in on time that night, because we were busy cleaning out the remains of American soldiers. And so it was not run well. It was not run the way things were in Afghanistan. And I think subsequently, the surge that, General Petraeus and others implemented showed that number one, you have to have security, but two, you need to get off these large bases and you need to start living with the people. You need to start, living their way of life to have any sort of credibility. And oh, by the way, you cannot be so, you're going to project a posture of being afraid if you're completely covered in body armor and this and that. How do you expect the people to be unafraid when you're all wrapped up in that? In Afghanistan, we didn't wear body armor. We wore, my uniform was my U.S. Army uniform with the name tapes taken off and a New York Yankee baseball hat, and it just was, but that was the sort of thing that gained credibility with the people. And, our team, we had facial hair and so forth. But we didn't really have that opportunity in Iraq. It was run by Big Army, and it presented a lot of problems for us, unfortunately. So I came home in March of 2005 from my Iraq tour. And a couple of years later, I actually exited the service. I just needed a break. It was all very quick with September 11th, and then Afghanistan 02 to 03, and then Iraq 04 to 05. So, I left. I left service and ended up getting back in December of 2010. I joined the Army National Guard, the Virginia Army National Guard, and I had 2 drills, and they told me, "Guess what? You're on your way back to Afghanistan." So, and that was very redemptive. It was a very, very good tour. And I once again, very much enjoyed being in Afghanistan. It was a little different than 2002, the tour back then, but it was still very, very good. And I very much enjoyed it. I really, really liked the Afghan people.
Wow. You've been on such a journey in the past, 10, 20 years. What was it like going from a substitute teacher to 1 year later on your way to Afghanistan?
It felt like the fulfillment of everything that I wanted to do in my life at that point, to be able to, serve my country in wartime, and, to be able to be with people that lived in the barest possible conditions. It just really put life into perspective. It was truly something special, but it also made it hard to go back to that life in America. And even now, sometimes it's hard to, when you have an experience like that, and I'm sure other soldiers have stated it through various wartime experiences, whether it have been scenes of intense battle or other things that cause, just a real intense brotherhood. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to replicate that feeling back home. But that's why back home is called back home. It's supposed to be different. So, but I always remember it, and thankfully, I have a family that understands, as much as they can, and is supportive of what it is that I've experienced in my lifetime. But sometimes it is very difficult when people are complaining about, maybe the line is too long at Walmart or this or that. And it's like, well, thank God we have a Walmart. I've been to places where people don't. And subsequent to that, I've been on missions trips to places like India and so forth, and just seen, people in even more abject poverty than even in Afghanistan. And it just was, it just really brings things into perspective for you. But that transition can definitely be a little bit difficult.
It seems like kind of the through point of all of, your experiences surrounding 9/11 and the global war on terror. Something that stands out to me is the humanity kind of that you've seen throughout all of it, and the brotherhood. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think you find that people have the same fundamental needs throughout the world, regardless of who they are, what their skin color is, whether they're a man, whether they're a woman. And obviously there are some differences and so forth. But I think God has definitely given us all the same fundamental needs and so forth, for food and water, and to be loved. And so I think, those things are, when you relearn those things in the context of war, it's actually a very, very good thing. And when you see it applied and applied well, it's a very, very special thing. And you feel that way about the people over there. You feel that way about the people that you serve with, and so forth. And so that is it's particularly special, and it's something that will never leave me. And in particular, Afghanistan, I would be humbled to be able to go back there someday if I somehow could. I do remain in touch with my interpreters, and we're very much hoping that we can get them here. We've been trying real hard, but it's been difficult. I later, after graduating with my graduate degree, I did a short internship with the Embassy of Afghanistan in DC, and it just was incredible. And and my religion is different and so forth, and I have a different belief system. But the fact that we were able to call each other brothers and so forth was really, really special.
That's incredible. So you kind of touched upon it a little bit, but can you talk kind of about your experience and how you became a chaplain candidate?
Sure. I've been in the National Guard for well, again, since 2010. And we had a pretty deep tragedy in my family in 2017, and it reaffirmed for me that there's no important place than where we spend eternity, and that Jesus is the answer to our sins and to our problems. So with that, I just was, after the death that I experienced in my family, that was a very motivating thing for me to go to seminary and sort of grapple with some of these questions about the problem of evil. Why do good people die young, and that sort of thing. But out of that, my faith actually came out stronger through it. And it was through that I entered the Army Chaplain Candidate Program through the National Guard. And actually, it was a very miraculous process. I mean, waivers came through for me that I needed, even when we didn't ask for them. So it was like, yeah, never seen this before. And so I've been a chaplain candidate for about 2 years now, hopefully going to chaplain school next year at Fort Jackson for 17 weeks. And yeah, just, looking forward to ministering to soldiers. But it was very interesting on several levels. So commissioning on my 20-year anniversary date, and commissioning as an E7 and, now being a second lieutenant. In many ways, it's like being a private all over again, but it's also very, very good and very, very humbling. But it is hard for me sometimes not to speak up when when a soldier is doing something like really goofy and, just uh, motivate them a way a non-commissioned officer normally would. It's you're an officer now, and you're also you're also in the chaplain corps. So it's like, you don't, maybe you should let the soldier's supervisor know, and, let them take care of it. So it's it's been a bit of a change in that regard, but I'd like to think my enlisted experience would help me to be a better chaplain.
Wow, you've had such a journey, and it seems like you have a lot of anniversaries and dates that are very important. Commissioning on your 20th anniversary, going to Afghanistan on the 1 year of 9/11. Can you talk about kind of what feelings does 9/11, September 11th, evoke with you every year?
Uh, every year, I think in a lot of ways it depends on my location. Like, because of COVID last year, I wasn't able to go to New York City. It was an incredibly sad feeling. I try to be in New York whenever I can. If I can't be in New York, I would rather be in Afghanistan, to be honest. But I do go up to, and I did celebrate the 10-year anniversary in Afghanistan. Well, not celebrate, I should say. Forgive me for saying that, but did commemorate, I should say. We had a special service at our chapel at Fob Lagman in Afghanistan in 2011. But I feel the need to be in New York. I think it evokes a lot of memories, intense patriotism. I think when I'm there with the families on September 11th at the site of the World Trade Center at the memorial, I think that is when the anger comes back, the anger of what happened, and that there was no justification for this. There was never a justification for Pearl Harbor, but I mean, this even more so. These were civilians. These were people who were simply looking to go to work. They were there to provide for their families or live the American dream or whatever it was that they were called to do. They were killed because they went to work, and it is just so it does evoke those feelings of anger. So, but I and also some feelings of nostalgia and missing what we had as a nation, sort of lamenting that the fact that we were together, and and it's just been so hard to see with the way our political and other systems have been. It's just been, seeing going from United We Stand to, where we are now. It's a little hard sometimes, but it's something that I need to do, and returning to the Trade Center every year that I possibly can. Yeah.
How do you think, oh, sorry, Break, you go.
I just wanted to ask, are there any life lessons you feel like sharing that you learned from your military service, specifically from 9/11 or in Afghanistan or Iraq?
We could be here a very long time, but yes, there are many. I'll never forget. In fact, it was actually shortly before 9/11. I met an American veteran who had served in World War II, and he's the only veteran to ever have won 2 Academy Awards for one role. It was Harold Russell. He was not a professional actor. He won Best Supporting Actor for the movie Best Years of Our Lives, which is a great coming home movie from 1946. You probably know it. It actually beat out It's a Wonderful Life for Best Picture.
That is an amazing movie. Yeah.
Yeah. So Harold Russell, he had lost his hands in a training accident actually on D-Day, but he was at Fort Bragg. And so he won Best Supporting Actor, but he'd also gotten an Academy Award for honor for supporting his fellow veterans. And the one thing he told me, I said, what would you tell people of my generation? He said, study international affairs. And he told me that I believe it was June of 2001. That was the last interview he ever gave. And he said, make sure you study international affairs. And so I think that would be a huge thing as far as the lessons learned. I think as far as, the military, especially when we're We cannot fight unconventional wars believing that they are conventional wars. Security needs to be established, but with that, and it's very difficult, not impossible, but it's very difficult to do when you have very young, motivated, 18 to 22-year-olds whose job is basically to be an unrelenting and effective killing machine. And, so it's very hard to get into that mind frame, but, that's the way it needs to be in a place like Afghanistan. You have to understand that victory does not mean a surrender in Tokyo Bay. Victory means in wars like that, maybe maintaining the status quo, and realizing what happens when Americans do leave. The Afghan people know about Americans leaving. They said it to us many times, and they asked us many times, when are the Americans going to leave? And it was, why do you keep asking? And they said, because you always leave. They said, you left South Vietnam, you left Somalia, you left Iraq after the first war. You always leave. You do good, but you always leave. And so it's, how do you do that without being an occupying force? And it's like, you have to do it with a small footprint, and you have to live amongst the people. But you have to be well read. I believe in international affairs. We need to encourage the military education system. The military needs to be much more less career focused, and I'd say more not academically focused, but more strategically focused, more a free exchange of ideas. I think the idea of perhaps having a different way of thinking than your counterpart should not preclude you from having a promotion. It shouldn't be a career killer, for example. And I think the military has been trying to initiate some steps with that, with 360 evaluations and so forth. But there are other things that that can be done. But also, you have to make sure that your conventional forces are also up to par and that they can fight a major war as well. We cannot continuously, draw down, go back up, draw down, go back up. We need to maintain a high level of readiness for the many threats, both conventional and unconventional, that we have in the world. And we need to continue everything we can to make sure that we have the latest, not only the latest greatest equipment, but also the latest and greatest in cultural training as well. And I think that's one area where we definitely need to improve. We need to send more soldiers to DLI. We need to send more soldiers to graduate school. Yes, whether they be enlisted soldiers or not. It doesn't necessarily have to be the officers and so forth. I think there's a lot that can be done. Exchange programs with different militaries. And I'm not talking about, a 1 or 2 week training exercise. I mean, just real stuff that I'd say the one thing we lack in our country. I'm a big person about America being first and so forth, believe me. But I think the one thing that we lack in our country is a real appreciation of cross-cultural study. My son is from another area of the world. He was adopted. He speaks 3 languages. We are not very good with other languages. Spanish, of course, is increasing, and that's a good thing. But I'm talking about from, whether it be Russian, whether it be Chinese, whether it be Arabic, Pashto, Dari, African languages and so forth. We're just not very good at that, and that was not the model of many great nations in the past. Say what you will about its origins, but the British School of Oriental and African Studies was always very, very good with teaching its people, whether their motivations were pure or not, about other cultures. And what they did a very good job of immersing people in other cultures while they were in academic study. And I don't necessarily see that we particularly have that on a large scale here in America. I know that's kind of a long-winded answer, but this is obviously something that I still think about almost every day. I want to see America win, and I want to see America do well, because I believe that America is a force for good. This is a special country. I mean, there's a reason that people will risk life and limb to come here, to jump over walls, to risk, a very poorly made boat, going across the Caribbean to come here. There's a reason for that. And I think it goes to more than just economic prosperity. I think it has to do with freedom, the same freedom that, those people went to work, that September morning 20 years ago that they were having, or those people that went to work in the Pentagon, who believed that their contribution to freedom was to work to actively defend it.
That's incredible. I mean, these experiences have obviously changed you and have motivated you in so many ways, have influenced your worldview, which I mean makes sense. But could you talk a little bit about how 9/11 and the global war on terror, your experiences, have changed you?
Well, I think initially, especially after coming home from Iraq, they did not change me for good. I think we're involved in a continuous process of change, and hopefully we become wiser and more compassionate as we get older. But I had some rough years after I got back from Iraq, and I did not deal with the change well at all. And I think ultimately for me, going to a Christian graduate school, meeting my wife there, starting to settle down. And as much as I would hate to admit it, getting out of the military for a couple of years just to sort of, clear the cobwebs in my head, to be back at a place to where I could join up and then go back to Afghanistan. That's, I'd like to think that I'm stronger in my faith. I'd like to think that I have a greater appreciation for people and love for people, in this country and throughout the world. Be appreciative of the fact that we do have, incredible differences, but also incredible talents that we've been endowed with. I think it's great that there are people that are very different than me that bring, their particular sets and skills to the table and so forth. So, I'd like to think that I have a greater appreciation for people as well. And at the end of the day, too, a greater love for this country. There's a reason that the first question you ask when you land, no matter how much I enjoyed my time in Afghanistan, but the first question you always ask once you land in country is, when do we go home? And there's a reason for that.
It's been so incredible being able to speak with you and hear about your experiences, hear your life lessons. What message would you like to leave for future generations who may be listening to this interview?
Well, since it's an open question, for me, the most important thing in my life now is Jesus Christ, and there's nothing more important than where we spend eternity. For our nation, I think America has an incredible future ahead. I think if we can remain united, I think that will be a key. Not that we will agree on everything, but we have to disagree without being disagreeable with each other. I think America is such a force for good that it is unstoppable, and not in an imperialistic sort of way, but in an inspiring way. I think if we remember that lesson, we remember the lessons of how we came together on September 11th, 2001, that can motivate us towards a brighter future. I'd also, like to ask future generations to please, please continue, no matter where you are on the political spectrum, to revere the profession of soldiering. Soldiering is a very honorable, very noble, very biblical profession. There's a reason that the Bible says that we are to soldier on for Christ and be an example for others as soldiers, because it's a very honorable profession. It's a profession that teaches you to go to your limits and beyond. So it's a very, very decent profession. It always will be. And I just would like people to remember that, and to remember that these experiences that soldiers have, and when I say soldiers, I talk about all the armed services, but it's different than what most people experience. So just to have a little patience and be a little understanding when they come home, and try and ease that transition home. And I think most military members do get that, but we just need to make sure that we make that transition for them as easily as possible. I mean, they fought for us, so we need to take care of them.
So is there anything else that you'd like to add to our interview or anything else that you want people to know?
I'm really thankful for, the life that God has given me. And, in just so many ways, from, my wife and son to be able to serve my country. I've really been blessed. I've been blessed more than I deserve. And I'm so incredibly thankful for that. And uh, just to remember that, America is truly a special place, and has special people, and hopefully we always remember that.
Thank you so much.